Welcome to Crisis in Perception, where we examine the systems shaping our world one book at a time.
Today, we are really digging into an absolute master of systemic anxiety and, well, bureaucratic alienation. We're looking at Franz Kafka.
Specifically through his short stories in the collection, The Unhappiness of Being a Single Man.
Right.
And our core question for this deep dive is, I think, incredibly powerful and maybe a little painfully relevant to anyone trying to navigate modern life. How do systems, institutional, bureaucratic, social, how do they impose a certain perception, kind of fundamental guilt and this huge power imbalance on an individual?
And often without a visible agent. There's no clear villain to point to.
Exactly. No clear policy, no single person you can blame. The system just is.
And that's why this matters so much right now. I mean, that emotional experience of navigating these huge, opaque institutions, it's everywhere.
The gut-level frustration of modern bureaucracy,
Yeah.
or the pressure of precarity, that social anxiety.
It's all captured so precisely in these stories, even though they were written a century ago. Kafka he understood the architecture of confusion.
And that's a really key point for us here. We aren't looking at these stories to, judge the characters or analyze their moral failings.
No, this is much more analytical.
We're using Kafka's terrifying and sometimes very funny and deeply sad scenarios as well as maps. We're analyzing the structures he lays out, the logic traps, the endless corridors, the impossible rules that produce these outcomes.
Outcomes like alienation, collapse, and just this profound confusion for the people who are trapped inside them.
Exactly. This is a systems-level analysis. We're looking at the logic of the machine itself, and we're using some of the most potent, precise short fiction ever written as our guide.
All to understand why complexity so often leads to individual despair.
Okay, so let's start with some context. The author, Franz Kafka. His work is legendary. Everyone knows the name.
Right. But as the translator of this collection, Alexander Starrett, points out, the word that almost always follows Kafkaesque is nightmare.
It's true. Yeah. You say that word, and you immediately get that specific, unsettling feeling.
That feeling of being caught in something terrifying, illogical, and just completely inescapable.
And Starrett makes this fascinating point that Kafka's work is, quote, respected far more than it is loved.
I think that's fair, because reading his longer novels, like The Trial or The Castle, can feel unpleasantly similar to actually being a character in them.
He says it's boring and painful at the same time.
And that's a crucial distinction, isn't it? It's not boring because nothing is happening. It's boring in the way that real bureaucracy is boring. It's cyclical, repetitive.
It's like that anxiety dream where you're trying to catch a flight, but you're stuck filling out the same form over and over again, and the gate just keeps getting further away.
Exactly. It's that endless circular frustration. It can be exhausting to read.
But this collection, The Unhappiness of Being a Single Man, is built on a very different idea, which is why it's so important for our analysis.
Starrett argues, and I think he's right, that the short stories form the actual core of all Kafka's work.
So why are they the core?
Well, because they don't have that interminable quality of the novels. They don't exhaust you with procedural length.
Instead, they're quick, funny, strange, and sad. They don't linger, they strike.
And that speed, that precision is where their systemic power comes from. They take his entire terrifying vision, that feeling of fighting forces that are incomprehensible and arbitrary, and they distill it
into these instant, unforgettable metaphors.
Right. They don't just describe alienation. They give you a lived reality in a single, perfectly built image that just sticks in your head for years. It's like a philosophical bumper sticker.
And that's why the curation of this collection is so important. Starrett's principle for including a story was simple, almost brutal.
Only the best.
Yeah. He wasn't trying to be chronological. He wasn't trying to show off different styles. He just wanted to rescue these essential, potent stories from the long shadow of the novels.
He wanted to give us the concentrated essence of Kafka.
So if we put that essence into plain language, the focus of our deep dive becomes really clear.
Kafka's short fiction is all about the individual's overwhelming struggle against forces that are, well, incomprehensible, arbitrary, or, and this is the most terrifying part, entirely self-perpetuating.
And that struggle leads directly to these feelings of profound, almost manufactured guilt, existential isolation, and, eventually destruction.
Okay, let's unpack this system piece by piece. This is where it gets really interesting, mechanically speaking. We've pulled out 6 key recurring patterns. You could almost call them rules. that structure Kafka's world.
Right. Let's start with the first one, Insight 1, the absurdity of inescapable predicament.
And it's so important to get how Kafka uses absurdity. It's not just nonsense for the sake of it.
No, it's a critique. It's a critique of these inescapable systemic logic traps, situations where the most rational conclusion is that you're going to be destroyed, and any kind of rational argument against it is, it's just irrelevant.
The perfect example is the Piney story, a short fable.
It's just a few sentences. You have a mouse, it's running down a corridor, and it sees the world getting narrower. The walls are hurrying towards each other so fast.
And the mouse comes to a perfectly logical conclusion. I'm already in the final room, and there in the corner is the trap I'm running into.
The mouse has flawlessly analyzed its system. It understands the physics of its world.
And that analysis is immediately validated, but in the cruelest possible way. The cat, which represents the authority of the system, offers a piece of advice.
Advice that is, on its face, totally logical.
Completely logical. The cat says all you have to do is run in the other direction.
And then immediately eats the mouse.
And that's the chilling part. The advice is irrelevant. Running the other way might solve the problem of the trap, sure.
But it doesn't solve the problem of the cat.
Which is the higher authority presiding over the entire system. The cat's presence, the inevitability of being eaten, it just makes any self-help strategy completely useless. The mouse's perception was 100% correct. The world is getting narrower, and no amount of clever running changes that fundamental power imbalance.
That leads us right into the next insight, doesn't it? Insight 2, unreachable authority and infinite distance.
It does, because in Kafka systems, the ultimate source of authority, the emperor, the law, is often absolute. It might even be benevolent, but it's permanently out of reach.
And that structural distance is what makes any action you take totally futile.
This is the central anxiety of a message from the emperor. It's such a brilliant setup. The emperor, on his deathbed, whispers a personal, sacred message directly to a messenger.
And it's meant specifically for you. For the lowly subject, you tiny shadow thrown far off into the furthest corner.
It's confirmed, it's repeated, the message is real. The messenger is capable. He's strong, a tireless man. He sets off immediately.
So the intent is pure, the messenger is committed, everything should work.
But the environment itself, the system's architecture, is designed to just absorb and stop all communication.
The system is just too vast.
It's too vast. The crowd is endless. The city is endless. Even if he somehow gets out of the apartments of the innermost palace, he still has to deal with spiraling staircases, courtyards, a second outer palace.
And it just goes on and on for thousands of years. The capital is literally the center of the world, just choked with buildings and people.
So the distance isn't just miles. It's bureaucratic friction, it's informational density, it's structural complexity. Structurally, the messenger will never, ever get out of that outermost gate.
Which means the message, even though it was personally whispered by the emperor, is functionally meaningless.
All you can do is sit at your window and dream of what it says when evening comes. The promise of a direct personal connection to authority just dissolves into a life sentence of wistful dreaming.
And if you can't reach the system, you kind of turn inward, right? Which brings us to Insight 3, self-imposed alienation and existential isolation.
Exactly. For Kafka, being alone is almost never a choice. It's a terrifying, predefined fate. It's imposed on you by social expectations or these paralyzing internal blocks.
This is the idea that gives the whole collection its name, the unhappiness of being a single man.
And that piece doesn't just talk about isolation in the abstract. It gives you a list, a specific, terrible list of obligations for the single man's future.
It's about the mandatory social awkwardness, having to stand on your dignity and ask someone for an invitation.
It's the fear of just domestic failure. Being sick and staring at an empty room, having to carry your dinner home in one hand, forcing yourself to eat it quickly just to get it over with.
You're defined entirely by absence, the absence of a partner, of a shared meal, of someone to care for you.
But the most terrifying systemic mandate in that piece, for me, is the obligation to model your appearance and behavior on one or two bachelors you remember from childhood.
Wow, right.
You don't get to invent a new, resilient way of being single. You're forced to imitate this inherited, flawed, probably miserable model of what it means to be alone.
And even when you try to go home, to a place of belonging, that internal alienation just stops you. We see that so clearly in Homecoming.
The traveler gets back to his father's farmyard. It should be the definition of warmth, of acceptance.
But he stops. He just listens from a distance.
He even sees the architecture as hostile, or at least indifferent. He thinks each brick lies cold against the next, as if occupied with its own affairs. The house itself is just absorbed in its own cold logic.
His fear is that if he knocks, he won't be seen as a returning son. He'll be seen as someone who wants to keep his secrets.
The very act of trying to enter makes him a suspicious outsider. He's structurally isolated from his own family kitchen by this invisible internal system of fear.
So we've seen how the system isolates the individual. But what about the people at the top? This is Insight 4. Authority defined by endless, pointless labor.
This is one of the most fascinating parts of Kafka's critique. Even the figures with seemingly absolute divine power, they're trapped too. Their role gives them no pleasure, just obligation and exhaustion.
Best, most ridiculous example has to be Poseidon.
Oh, it's perfect. You think of the god of the seas, you picture storms, a trident, raw power.
Instead, Kafka gives us a celestial bureaucrat. He is stuck at his desk, completely overwhelmed by an endless amount of work, just going through accounts.
His role is purely administrative. He hates the work. He only does it because he was assigned to do it. He can't even get an assistant because he insists on checking every single calculation himself.
So the system demands this obsessive, personal micromanagement, even from a god.
And the truly absurd part, he's never even properly seen the seas he's supposed to be in charge of.
No way.
He's only seen them briefly on the hurried ascent to Olympus. He's so consumed by the internal bookkeeping of his authority that his big dream is to wait for the end of the world so he can finally take a quick look at the water.
That's a profound systemic critique. It shows the system consumes everyone, no matter where they are in the hierarchy.
Exactly. The divine bureaucrat at the top is just as much a victim of the institution's arbitrary rules as the lowly subject is. The rules are the problem.
Which brings us to what happens when those rules are used to judge people. Insight 5. Unjust judgment and manufactured guilt.
Right. In Kafka's world, judgment has almost nothing to do with evidence or due process. It's a brutal assertion of power, usually patriarchal or institutional, that often creates a whole new reality just to justify the sentence.
This is the verdict, right?
Yeah.
The story is just a masterclass in this kind of informational warfare.
It is. Georg Benjamin, the son, decides to tell his old, withdrawn father that he's engaged. It's an act of respect, and it's the catalyst for his entire world to shatter.
The father immediately destabilizes Georg's reality. He starts questioning everything. Why didn't you tell me the whole truth? Does your friend in St. Petersburg even exist?
He suggests Georg has been secretly running the family business behind his back since his mother died.
Then he leaps up and just he constructs this terrible, complex, manufactured reality that Georg never even suspected existed.
He claims Georg has disgraced his mother's memory, betrayed his friend, and only got engaged because his fiancée is a, quote, horrible tramp.
And what's so devastating isn't just the anger. It's how complete the system is that the father asserts.
Yes, he claims he's secretly been in touch with the friend the whole time, acting as the friend's representative here on the ground.
And that the son is a fiend. This fabricated history is just. It's unanswerable because it retroactively rewrites Georg's entire life, his relationships, his motives. How can you defend yourself when the basic facts of your life are declared false?
You can't. The accusation moves from a personal slight to a total systemic condemnation. The father literally shouts, "I now sentence you to death by drowning."
And Georg is just annihilated. He runs out to the river, and his very last thought is this desperate appeal to an emotional truth, something outside the system.
Dear parents, haven't I always loved you?
But the system has already decided the answer is no.
Finally, we have Insight 6. Trapped by art and obsession. This is where Kafka shows that even the pursuit of pure, limitless individual perfection is always constrained or misunderstood by the demands of the system managing it.
This is the agony of a hunger artist. He's a virtuoso. He can fast for seemingly impossible lengths of time, pursuing this pure internal perfection.
But he is denied true greatness. Why? Because the impresario, the manager of the system, sets a public limit of 40 days.
And why 40 days?
Because that's what the market will bear. After that, the audiences would start to dwindle.
So the system of entertainment management, the need for ticket sales, for profit, it just puts a cap on the artist's pursuit of infinite perfection. His actual skill is totally irrelevant to what the system needs.
And the artist knows it. He's deeply, profoundly dissatisfied because he knows how easy it was to fast. He never wants to leave the cage. He has to be forced out on the impresario's schedule.
And the system then uses the consequences, his weak body, to justify ending the fast. It's a cruel twisting of the facts to fit the commercial narrative.
He only finds satisfaction in his own private, unrecognized perfection when he's finally forgotten and left to die in a dusty cage.
And his final words, whispered as he's being replaced by a commercially successful panther, are just heartbreaking.
I couldn't find a meal I would have liked to eat. He didn't starve from a lack of food. He died from dissatisfaction, consumed by the system's failure to even recognize his true boundless capacity.
Okay, so those 6 insights give us the horrifying and sometimes darkly funny rules of Kafka's system. Now let's map how these rules operate institutionally.
Right, this is our systems mapping section. We're looking at the specific mechanisms that keep these structures running.
Let's start with institutional authority, specifically law and bureaucracy. Kafka shows the law not as a path to justice, but as an endless structural obstacle designed to just exhaust you to death.
The ultimate exploration of this is before the law. A man from the country spends his entire life trying to reach the law, and he's blocked by one single gatekeeper.
And that gatekeeper is crucial. He immediately sets up a hierarchy of power. He says he's only the lowest ranking, but warns that inside there are more chambers, more gatekeepers, each one more terrifying than the last.
And that threat of a stronger, unseen inner authority is what stops the man from just trying to rush the gate, even though it's technically open.
The man tries everything. He waits for years and years. He offers bribes.
And the gatekeeper accepts them, but he says he's only doing it so you don't think there's something you haven't tried.
That is the ultimate cynical move. Accepting the bribe just to confirm that the person has exhausted all their options, but without delivering anything, the system has to confirm your futility.
As he gets old and his sight fails, he starts begging the fleas in the gatekeeper's collar to help him. And in his last moments, he finally asks the big question.
Everybody wants the law. So why is it that in all this time, no one apart from me has asked to be let in?
And the gatekeeper shouts the final, annihilating truth, the personalization of the systemic trap.
No one else could come in this way because this entrance was reserved only for you. I'll go now and close it.
Just think about the mechanical cruelty of that. The system was created specifically for him, but purely to deny him access. His entire life was spent fighting an obstacle that was simultaneously personalized and completely arbitrary. It is a perfect closed loop of systemic futility.
And that structural denial leads right into the idea of bureaucracy as exhaustion, which we see play out in The Stoker.
Yes. The main character, Carl Rossman, is a teenager who gets sent to America and is immediately lost on this labyrinthine steamship.
The physical environment itself is a weapon of the system.
It is. The endless stairs, the branching corridors, the huge mechanical spaces, they disorient him immediately. He's defeated by the scale before he even meets anyone in charge.
And the rules are arbitrary from the start. The chief engineer on this German ship is Romanian, for instance. It just underlines the haphazard, cobbled-together nature of the authority structure.
So when the Stoker tries to appeal his unfair treatment, he gets sucked into this bureaucratic bog. He has a real grievance against the engineer, Schubel.
But his attempt at justice is instantly bogged down. By procedure, by rivalries, Schubel has a prepackaged gang of witnesses ready to go.
Then just by the general impatience of the officials, who have more important things to do.
The sheer effort required just to get a hearing, to be in the right room, is physically and mentally exhausting. The system works by making you expend huge amounts of energy just to fight a predetermined outcome.
And here's where Kafka exposes the machine perfectly. The only reason Carl's problem gets solved is because his rich senator uncle happens to show up. It's a complete accident.
A miracle.
A miracle totally unrelated to the logic of the system or the truth of the Stoker's claims. Fairness is secondary to fortune.
We also need to map the raw physical power dynamics, the power asymmetry. The story The Bridge is the most brutal, immediate example.
The bridge exists for one reason: to serve the traveler. Its identity is its function. It says, unless it collapses, a bridge once built can never stop being a bridge. It's defined by its obligation.
But when the traveler shows up, his actions are all about casual dominance. He taps the bridge, rests his stick in its hair, then jumps with both feet onto its middle.
And the bridge registers this as a violation. It shudders in bewildered pain.
So the system, the bridge, tries to process this violation. Its rebellion is to try and turn around to look at him.
But A bridge turning around is a fundamental violation of its own structural integrity. And that one attempted act of selfhood, of questioning its purpose, results in its immediate collapse and total destruction.
The moment the system tries to assert its own self, it's annihilated. The only way for it to persist is to rigidly stick to its function no matter what.
But then, on the other hand, systems can be managed and controlled, even destructive ones, through narrative and delusion.
This is the idea in The Truth About Sancho Panza.
Exactly. Sancho Panza, who seems like the servant, is actually the free man. He cleverly used piles of novels about knights and robbers to distract his internal devil, the destructive energy of Don Quixote.
So he channels that chaotic energy into harmless, targetless, crazy exploits.
It's a systemic hack. The power dynamic is reversed. The weaker party, Sancho, uses delusion-inventing adventures to manage and pacify the stronger destructive force. It's a survival mechanism through structured distraction.
But the most detailed system map, the real heart of Kafka's institutional critique, has to be in narratives of obligation and punishment.
Oh, absolutely. This is the grim, meticulous mechanism we see in the penal colony.
The entire system there is self-contained and totalizing. The judicial process operates on one single horrifying principle, which the officer states outright.
The defendant's guilt is never in doubt.
Which immediately gets rid of any idea of due process. The condemned man doesn't know his sentence, he hasn't had a chance to defend himself.
When the visitor asks if the man knows he's been sentenced, the officer says, "Not that either. It would be pointless to tell him. He's going to get it written on his own skin."
And the execution is this slow, methodical, 12-hour ritual performed by a machine called the harrow. It literally inscribes the sentence, a moral rule like, respect your superior officers, onto the man's naked skin.
The goal isn't a quick death. The goal is psychological internalization of the system's absolute justice. The key moment is the 6th hour, the dawn of understanding, when the victim finally deciphers the script from his wounds.
It's a machine designed not just to kill, but to create enlightened self-condemnation, to make the victim agree with their own punishment.
Though what's fascinating is that the system is decaying. The machine is dirty, screws are screeching, and the new commandant is introducing this mild approach, giving prisoners sweets before execution.
That misplaced leniency sabotages the pure, cruel logic of the machine. The condemned man, full of sweets, gets sick and vomits all over the machine right before it starts.
The officer is furious. They're making my machine as dirty as a cowshed. The system just cannot handle human unpredictability or mercy.
So the officer, in a desperate attempt to save the system's integrity, sentences himself to be executed. The inscription is, "Be just."
But the decay is total. The machine shakes itself apart, gears fly out, and instead of enlightenment, the officer's face shows no sign of the promised redemption. The system, once corrupted, can't even execute its most devoted follower properly. It was just murder, not ritual justice.
The final psychological system we see is the intense, painful process of the internalization of control.
This is a report for an academy, narrated by Red Peter, an ape who has successfully become human.
And Peter's very clear. He was looking for a way out, not freedom.
Yeah.
He sees freedom as an illusion. The only realistic way out of the cage was to become his captors, to become human.
He did it through what he calls brutal, ruthless self-discipline and imitation. He bent my neck to that yoke. He taught himself to spit, smoke, drink rum.
He describes his simian self just rushing out of him. It was a violent, painful self-exorcism to fit into the human system.
So his success isn't a triumph of liberation. It's a perfect adoption of the human way out to make yourself scarce. He achieved the educational level of the average European, which he cynically notes is nothing at all, but it was enough to get out of the cage.
It's such an unnerving critique. The best form of freedom the system offers isn't fighting it, but transforming yourself to fit its mediocre rules.
And it leads to this profound, ongoing alienation. He still keeps a half-trained chimp in his room, the physical reminder of his repressed past. But he can't bear to look at its bewilderment, the shame of his original failed self.
And before we move on to modern day, it's crucial to point out one thing about all these systems.
The persistence without clear villains.
Exactly. In these stories, the penal colony, Poseidon, the emperor's messenger, the people in charge are rarely malicious. They're just functionaries.
The system exists through its own inertia. The officer in the penal colony is just defending a legacy he believes in. Poseidon is trapped by a job he got at the beginning of time. The gatekeeper is only the lowest ranking.
Accountability is impossible because the real agent of harm is the immutable structure itself. It's internal rules, not human will.
Okay, so let's connect all of this to our present-day reality. Why should you care about a story from 100 years ago about a god doing paperwork?
Because the emotional and structural experience is identical. We constantly face the modern bureaucracy, the Sisyphean task.
When you are fighting a vast, unresponsive organization, the government, a corporation, an insurance company, you are the man from the country, desperate for entry.
Think about a corporate call tree. It's a perfect metaphor for a message from the emperor. The solution you need exists somewhere, but the endless transfers, the required credentials, the waiting on hold, it all means the effort you expend is completely out of proportion to the actual task.
The complexity serves a purpose. Exhaustion. The system relies on you getting tired and giving up.
And like we saw with Carl Rossman in The Stoker, any success you have is often purely accidental, a structural miracle, like his uncle showing up. It has nothing to do with the logic or fairness of the process you just went through.
And that's a soul-crushing realization. Your sincerity, your evidence, your pushiness, all that effort was wasted because the system had already decided you were a troublemaker and only a Deus ex machina could save you.
Then you have our modern legal and administrative systems. The complexity and specialized language for licenses, permits, tax codes, those are the new gatekeepers from before the law.
The system is theoretically open, but it's practically impenetrable. The complexity itself is the structural denial. You need an expensive intermediary, a lawyer or a consultant, just to translate the rules.
The idea of spending a lifetime supplicating a gatekeeper just to get a resource that's theoretically available to everyone feels exactly like trying to get a complicated zoning permit.
And we also see clear parallels with social alienation and precarity.
The anxieties in The Unhappiness of Being a Single Man and Homecoming map perfectly onto the modern experience of the atomized individual in a gig economy, post-community world.
The decline of stable social structures leads to this modern anxiety of defining yourself by what you lack. The overwhelming fear of being sick and alone, the shame of not having the expected social markers, a partner, a stable community, these are still the existential traps.
What about the psychological demands of modern work, even for someone who is successful? This is the emotional experience of opaque institutions.
Take the trapeze artist in A First Heartache. He's a hyper-specialized, successful person who lives on his trapeze to maintain perfection.
His despair isn't from a lack of skill. It's from the systemic constraint. The necessary transfers between venues and this gnawing thought of only ever that one bar in my hands.
That realization that his perfection is confined to a single repetitive act, it threatens his entire way of life.
The manager sees the first wrinkles beginning to etch themselves into the artist's boyishly smooth forehead. Success is achievable, but because of systemic constraints, existential peace is structurally impossible.
Okay, let's take one final step back and look at how all this reinforces the broader themes we explore here at Crisis and Perception.
Let's start with invisible power. Kafka is a master at showing how authority is maintained through subtle means, or even through the calculated absence of action.
The absolute masterpiece of this is The Silence of the Sirens. We all know the story of Odysseus, the wax, the chains. He thinks the sirens are singing their deadly song.
But their true weapon, their weapon even more terrible than their singing, is their silence.
The theory is, if they had sung, Odysseus might have burst his chains. But by staying silent, they attack him psychologically. He feels this reckless hubris, this feeling of having overcome them with his own strength. He defeats nothing, but thinks he's a hero.
He's saved only because he didn't hear their silence.
But the postscript suggests his true cunning was even deeper. Maybe he did notice the silence, but pretended not to hear it, creating this shield of functional delusion. The scariest threats are the ones you can't perceive, the absence of the expected structure.
Next, we have systems that exhaust rather than punish. We saw the penal colony machine designed to exhaust a prisoner psychologically. We see a slower, similar destruction in the life of the hunger artist.
His life is just consumed by fighting the manager's schedule and the public's indifference. He dies not from a failure to eat, but from being denied systemic recognition of his true perfection. He's psychologically consumed by the gap between his capacity infinity and the system's demand, 40 days.
And this is often reinforced by authority, maintained through ambiguity. The truth is never clear. Motives are layered, making it impossible to know how to respond.
In The Married Couple, the narrator, a businessman, watches an old man, N, seemingly die in his armchair during a meeting. This creates instant emotional and commercial chaos.
But then N's wife comes in with a warmed nightshirt and revives him with her affection, her boundless trust of the innocent.
The whole incident is soaked in ambiguity. Did N fake his death to get out of the meeting? Was his revival due to his wife's faith, or was it just a natural recovery?
The narrator is left totally confused, realizing the power dynamics are rooted not in strength, but in this weird mix of weakness, care, and deception. It's an exercise in trying to find a truth that might not even exist.
And finally, Kafka is the master of showing how individual blame replaces systemic critique.
Right. When a system is flawed, its functionaries will immediately deflect any challenge by focusing on the moral failings of the challenger.
Back to the stoker. The chief purser immediately calls the stoker a well-known troublemaker with unwarranted demands.
This character assassination happens even though the captain himself admits the chief engineer is the real systemic problem. He's getting a bit too independent.
But by shifting the narrative to the stoker's character defects, his loudness, his manner, they isolate him. It prevents any real audit of the unfair management practices and keeps the hierarchy safe. The challenger becomes a moral failure, and the structural problem is ignored.
What stands out to me across all of these stories is just the emotional precision. Even when the situations were surreal or grotesque, they tap into something we already feel when we deal with complex power structures.
That's it, exactly. The power of Kafka's short fiction is that it reveals the essence of the modern condition more clearly than his longer works. It's a quick, potent, unforgettable hit of absurdity and emotional clarity.
They map the invisible walls of the world, the arbitrary law, the sea god's accounting, the fear of knocking on your own door. These are crystallized metaphors for the internal experience of being managed, judged, or ignored by these massive inhuman structures.
And they are so emotionally accurate today because our institutions, bureaucracies, legal systems, financial markets, they all operate on the same principle of structural indifference.
Success feels accidental, justice feels arbitrary, and guilt is asserted without reason, just because the structure needs to assert its own authority.
And what they help us recognize are the subtle, often ridiculous ways that invisible power operates. It's not usually a grand tyrant or a malicious villain.
It's the logic trap, the labyrinthine corridor, the gate that exists only for you but is perpetually closed. And it's that final message from the laughing policeman in this story, Give Up, who, when asked for directions, just laughs and says, give up, give up.
A profound recognition that sometimes the only way forward is understanding when the system has already decided to stop you and, what that resignation costs.
This has been a profoundly illuminating deep dive into the world of Franz Kafka and the systems he mapped so precisely. Our thanks as always to the author Franz Kafka and our acknowledgement of Alexander Starrett, the translator who curated this essential collection, The Unhappiness of Being a Single Man.
If this discussion has piqued your interest and you want to experience the specific emotional precision we've discussed, we strongly encourage you to read the collection yourselves, support the author's estate and the translator, or check your local library for access.
For a shorter visual overview of this topic, see the mini explainer linked in the description.
If you enjoy this kind of systems-level analysis, please like, subscribe, and comment with books or topics you'd like us to explore next.